This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. All right, guys, we've got a special guest on the podcast today. His name is Jim Ramos. So he is an author, speaker, and the founder of Men in the Arena. That is a Christian nonprofit focused on equipping men to honor God in the leadership of their family, church, and community. So he has a new book that's out now called Dialed In, Reaching Your Full Capacity as a Man of God. But this guy's written over a dozen books at this point, kind of all in that men's ministry type vein. And this guy's been doing this men's ministry thing for about 35 years or so. But in this particular podcast, we flowed quite a bit on a lot of the same subjects that you guys have heard me talk about for a long time. So how did he get into the men's space? Why is he choosing to stay there? Because it can be kind of niche. But we talk about what it means to have a man-friendly church, not just focus on men's ministry. What culture has done to the role of manhood and how we look at manhood, but also looking at things like cowardly pastors, not really talking to young men, saying, hey, you shouldn't be having sex and, living with your girlfriends before you get married. It's bad for you. You shouldn't do it. And really how that cowardice really spreads into a lot of other different subject matters where pastors don't want to talk about abortion. They don't want to talk about anything politically related. They don't want to talk about anything that's culturally, politically, or societally charged and how that doesn't really lead to good things overall. But we weaved in and out of a lot of great subjects there for about the first half hour. And then the last half hour, we get into Dialed In. And so again, it's Dialed In, Reaching Your Full Capacity as a Man of God, kind of why he wrote that book, how he approached it, because basically he sets up a biblical approach for these 20 different, I guess you could call it qualities of a biblical godly man. And so we talk about what it means to be a blameless man, like how we can live above reproach. Also, what it means to be a disciplined man and how we can make decisions against ourselves, which was a very interesting conversation. But then we got into a conversation toward the end there about what it means to be a protector. And he described what he said was kind of a unique perspective that puts him in the scholarly minority, I believe is how he said it. And so that's an interesting subject matter for us to get into as well. But guys, I think you're really going to enjoy this time that I had with Jim. So without further ado, let's get into it. Jim Ramos, I would just do my normal welcome, which is welcome to Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. But we've spent the last 15 minutes getting to know each other because apparently the technology gods don't want us to connect because here we are on Zoom, we were on Riverside, and at some point we had to go through a wormhole. But you're technically here now. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yeah, we're good to go. I'm ready to rock and roll, man. Let's do it.
Oh, man, I was crossing my fingers and toes, and here we are. We have finally made it. So you and I both, we're kind of in the same spaces here in terms of the Christian men's space. It can be a crowded space. It can be a space that doesn't allow for a lot of creativity, but it looks like you've done this for a while. But I guess my question is, why do you even care about men? Why do you care about Christian men and wanting to make sure that they're actually living a life that they purport to say that they want to be living?
That's a really interesting question. I was a youth minister for 25 years, and I realized through all of that, when I sat down, I started thinking, what is really wrong with the teenager today? I realized the problems really stemmed from their dads not being there or their dads having major issues. And as I started thinking about this, I thought, if we really want to change a culture, me being a youth pastor is not it. We need to step into a different space. The men's ministry space is really, in a lot of ways, a space that's ignored in the local churches. If you look at church budgets, they typically ignore the men's ministry space, focus on children and women. But biblically, if you look at the Bible, if you actually do a deep dive into the Word of God, you look at every time, almost every single time God did a major work, he started with men. Men are God's starting place. So I thought, okay, we need to go back to the starting place and work with men, because as men go, so goes the culture. And, I do believe that most of society's problems rest on the shoulders of males, but men are the solution. So it was transitioning these males, biological males, into men. And that's what we've been deeply committed to. And it is a very small space. If you look at the population of America and you take the population of men, you break that down to Christian men. I mean, it's a very niche type of space, and we just dove into it just like you did. So I applaud you as well, man. We're in a small little area trying to do some big work.
Well, Jim, I would completely agree with you that the majority of our societal issues can go back to men that have either abdicated their responsibility. So, maybe that's, within their families, ditching their wives and children, or never wifing the woman up to begin with, but just, basically fathering children, but not or siring children but not fathering them, I guess would be the way that you would say it.
Yep.
And then, yes, I think society is doing what it can culturally to stamp out the man, to say that men aren't important, men aren't necessary. That's what the third and fourth wave feminism is basically saying. Women are essentially men. We don't really need them. They don't really have a unique purpose. And so, well, I guess speak a little bit to that, because there's this cultural milieu that I feel like we're all marinating in that is basically communicating that. You saw this in the 90s where all of the dad figures were dopes and stupid, and the mothers
100%.
and the kids were always smart. And again, everyone's talked about that at this point. But I think we've bought the lie that dad's just kind of dumb. Dad wears, awkward socks and, the white New Balance shoes. And he doesn't really know what he's doing. And he's not really like a leader. I don't really need to lean on him. And I think we've bought the cultural lie. What do you think?
Well, here's the deal. In the 90s, we saw, everyone loves Raymond and all these dorky looking nerdy guys. And my wife and I've been watching binge watching the Friends episodes. I'm like, man, these are a bunch of pansies, So this was kind of what our society portrayed. And it's really interesting, though. Our society has become extremely subjective. We have a ton more information at our fingertips than ever before in the history of the world, but truth is scarce. Even in the news, it's like watching the WWE. It's great entertainment, but it's not truth. So for us, if you remove subjectivity, if you remove emotionalism, if you remove our predisposed biases, and you just look at the facts, the facts tell us that when the man is not in the home, children have a higher probability to be in prison, to have mental disorders, to not go into the higher education past high school or even past middle school. Sometimes when men are not absent, the culture and the family unit breaks down. But this movement that you're calling third wave feminism, one of the things that they're doing that really bothers me is they're trying to even replace the men in the narrative. So they say like this: okay, if two lesbians are married together, that is my partner. If two homosexual men are married together, that is my partner. But if a husband and wife is married together, they say that is your partner. And I say, no, that word partner is a critical theory, woke type of term. And we have to reject that. And we have to call people out on that every time, because my wife is my spouse. She is the woman I have covenant with. We are one flesh. We are a marriage under God that God recognizes. And don't call your cohabitating girlfriend your partner and think that's the same as my wife. That is different. My wife is a special and unique person in a marriage that's ordained by God. And so what we have to do is we have to push back on this narrative that says not only is the man not necessary, but you don't even have to have a family. You don't have to have your head of household. The man doesn't have to be in the family unit. Two lesbians can be a family that God blesses. And that's just not, it's just not accurate in reality. It's not accurate biblically, and it's not accurate objectively.
Well, partner is a business term.
Correct.
That's what partner is. And so you're not going into a business arrangement if you're in a covenantal marriage. I think part of the problem, Jim, is that most people don't look at marriage as a covenant. They look at it as a temporary contractual agreement, which says basically I will be here until things get too hard or too difficult, at which point I'm going to bounce. And so the same we see is with cohabitation before marriage.
100%.
And it's always funny when sociology catches up with a biblical ethic, but sociologically speaking, the rates of divorce are higher for couples that cohabitate before they get married. And people are like, well, that doesn't make any sense. You wouldn't buy a new truck before you test drive it. It's like, what you're not understanding is, yes, you're seeing what it's like to live with that person. You're seeing what it's like to have sex with that person. You're seeing what it's like to fight with that person, to get a dog with that person, to share, mortgage payment or a rent payment or something like that. But what you're also doing is you're practicing non-committal relationship. You're practicing having no commitment to an individual person, because before you're married, which these same people would argue is just a piece of paper, before you get married, it's the exact same thing. If things get too hard, if they get too awkward, if they get too difficult, if I'm not having fun, if you're not fulfilling my needs, if I'm not living my truth, then I'm just going to bounce. And so if you put a ring on it and then you go through this, ceremony that costs tens of thousands of dollars where you focus on wedding and not marriage, and then you get years down the road and you're no longer being fulfilled, as it were, then it's like, okay, yeah, why wouldn't you just get divorced? Because it's basically like an extra bad high school breakup. Does that make sense?
I feel like I'm talking to myself right now. So statistically, this is object truth. This is not subjective reality. This is object truth, absolute truth. When the more a couple spends on their wedding, the less success they have in their marriage. And USA Today reported that the most fulfilled couples sexually are monogamous heterosexual couples that attend church regularly. These are facts here. So everything you're saying is right on the money. And here's the other thing. This is scary. Barna researched that 33% of practicing Christian men under 35 live with their girlfriends before marriage. That's the same number as non-Christian men. And so I have determined that a lot of people out there who are church attending, practicing Christian men really aren't even saved. They're throwing a name out there. I won't use the word Christian anymore. I say I follow Jesus, because that Christian word describes something that is no different than the secular world. So we have to call these young guys and say, listen, guys, we need to call you up into truth and out of this subjective compromise that you're negotiating because it seems to be easier for you, but at the end of the day, it's going to cost you higher rates of divorce, less rates of marital satisfaction, less rates of sexual satisfaction, and that's what I love what you're doing with Undaunted.Life. You're calling these guys up into the truth and out of this lie that they've bought into because they're listening to cultural and pop psychology.
Well, Jim, they're worshiping at the altar of pragmatism, and it sounds practical
100%.
Because we keep hearing the sob story about, oh, houses are too expensive and I can't find one, or rent's expensive, or blah, blah. It's like, okay, well, if it's too expensive to live in downtown Austin or downtown Seattle or downtown New York City, then you might have to try something a little bit different. But even their parents, kind of caught up in all of this, is their parents are cowards and their pastors are cowards, because they shouldn't be saying, because you'll hear those same people encouraging these young people to go and do that. Oh, I get it. It's tough out there. It's tough in the job market. It's tough in the financial market. Oh, you got all the student loan debt for this worthless degree. So why don't you just basically move in together? You can split bills. It makes perfect sense in a cultural way. Not in a biblical way, not in a godly way. And so we're encouraging this pragmatism. And the hard part about it is because pastors, these go along to get along pastors, these I want to be known for what I'm for, not what I'm against pastors. They don't want to run these people off by, I don't know, holding them to some sort of a biblical ethic or standard. And so they just like, go ahead. And they will be taking people through premarital counseling, knowing that they are living together and having sex. It's like, what do you think your job is, sir? Your job is to just basically like bless no matter what the union is, so you can get paid $500 to do a ceremony on the weekend. Like, what's wrong with you?
Well, we are not. I know there's a movement in America, which I won't name it, but there is a movement out there that is saying we're going to stick with Jesus and we're not going to hit these other issues like abortion, cohabitation, homosexuality. We're going to avoid those because we could lose numbers. And it's really interesting to me because that's not what Jesus did. Jesus looked around, he saw thousands of people following him. He said, hey, I want to say something. Eat my flesh and drink my blood. They're like, we're out. He looked around, he told his disciples, you're the only ones left. Do you guys want to go? Because here's the deal. Jesus wasn't concerned about building a big people or a big movement. He was concerned about growing big people, and those big people create a big movement. And so we've got this movement in America that says, I want to grow the numbers, and they're doing it by compromising the word of God. And God's not going to bless that. He may bless that numerically, but it's really interesting. Willow Creek Community Church about 15 years ago did a survey, and at the time they were the biggest church in America. And they did a survey on discipleship, and they came to the conclusion after spending hundreds of thousands of dollars that their method was not effective in making disciples.
Shock of all shocks, because the seeker-sensitive movement, the seeker-friendly movement, is about converts, not disciples. And here's 100%. The thing. If you're focused on converts, then you will use a very... All right, I'm going to go off the rails here, so let's just go off the rails. Then emotionalism is part of your toolkit. So what does that mean? That means really emotional music with chorus, 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 bridge, bridge, chorus, bridge, bridge again, slower chorus, bridge in a different key, chorus, chorus, chorus. And then you build up all of this excitement, all of the tears, all of the everything. Then you get the TED Talk pastor that basically figures out what life lessons he wants to teach you. And then he finds some Bible verses to like shove in there real quick so he can keep its tax exempt status. And then at the end, they start playing the piano during the altar call and all that. And you're still pretty whipped up from the funny sermon and the interesting music. And now you raise your hand. They get to count you on your annual report, but then there's no follow-up. There's no discipleship. There's no helping you to figure out how to even study the Bible, how to get into godly biblical community, but they get to count you anyway. And so that church was one of the churches that helped start this entire thing. The church I went to for over 10 years, Life Church, kind of did the multi-site. We're going to have one guy basically satellited into all these different groups. And the thing is you are filling buildings, but you are not filling the kingdom of God. And I'm not anti-big buildings, anti-big parking lots. There's great examples of churches that can do both. You get converts and then you disciple them. I always try to shout out Church of 1122 down in Florida. They're an enormous church. They've got multiple sites. They got big buildings, big parking lots, but they actually take discipleship seriously. But that's the problem with the seeker-sensitive movement is you'll get the people in the door, but then you're not doing anything with them other than entertaining them.
Yeah, I think that movement is I think for the most part it's dying, especially in the rural areas. But it's really interesting to me because, again, I like to go back to the Bible. You know, I've looked in the Bible, and nowhere in the Bible did Jesus ever said to go and make decisions. He said to go and make disciples, and it's that disciple who's going to make more disciples. And I think we've got caught up in this, and I do think there's a lot of emotionalism. The problem with this movement is it's driven by phenomenal communicators.
Right.
They're phenomenal communicators.
Absolutely.
And so they are masters at manipulating the emotions of people. And it's tough for me because I want to see God do stuff, but we have to trust God to do stuff. And I realize that he has called us to steward the gifts he's given us, but we have to be very careful to never waver from what the word of God says and to never shrink back. Hebrews 10:39 says, we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but through faith are saved. And so, we need to not stop shrinking back. And that's the problem with our country right now, Kyle, is we've shrank back instead of standing up and saying, hey, listen, homosexuality is a sin. Living together before marriage is a sin. Adultery is a sin. All these things are sins. Abortion is murder. And we need to start saying these things because these all point to a bigger truth. We can't shrink back from the truth. And it's all part of that.
Well, Jim, you know this, like I'm literally yelling into the abyss right now. Like the reason why they won't go into those tough subject matters is because they're cowardly. And so let's take the abortion issue, one of the most incendiary ones. You have pastors that are terrified of the women in their congregation because as opposed to giving those women a message of hope, a message of, look, you are totally depraved aside from the propitiation of your sin debt because of Jesus' sacrifice on the cross. But instead, they're just going to go along to get along. They're going to not mention it at all, or they'll hop into the subject matter and hop right back out because, well, we don't want to hurt women and we don't want to judge these people. Look, I give over an hour-long presentation on how to defeat pro-abortion arguments. And I start with Romans 8:1, where it's like there are now therefore no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And so I say, I know there are women in this audience tonight that have had abortions. I know that. I also know that there are men in this audience that have paid for abortions, that drove their women to and from the abortion facility because they weren't ready to be a dad. They wanted to have fun, but they didn't want to be a father, right? And I know that there are grandparents here that paid for their child's problem to just go away so they wouldn't have to explain to the guys down at the golf club that their, cute little innocent girl isn't quite so innocent. And I say, now that we know that, can we all put on our big girl and big boy pants and say there's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus? But if you're not in Christ Jesus, there is condemnation because that's how the gospel works. The reason that it is good news is that you are totally depraved unless you have the truth of the gospel and you've repented and put your faith in that. But look, I just said that I'm a podcaster and I just said that in 60 seconds and these dudes get paid to do this for a living and they can't do it from the pulpit. Help me.
We're watching, I don't know what the numbers are now, but it was 1.5 million babies a year aborted. And at the time when I looked into this, there were 1.5 million couples looking to adopt a baby. So you can see the Holy Spirit working in all of this, even in the midst of sin, right? You can see God's redemption working through it all, but we have to be willing to call people out of that. I mean, it's not about condemnation, because Romans 8:1 is a verse I've prayed over more people than probably any other verse ever. But it's about calling them up out of that sin and helping them and showing compassion. But we have to deliver this compassionate message, but it's still got to be truthful.
Yes,
It's
it's got to
still got
have
to be
teeth.
based on the word of God.
Well, Jim, you know this. You can't truly be compassionate unless you're being truthful, because
100%.
because otherwise it is faux compassion, right?
Mhm.
And so look at the examples from the Bible. That he didn't tell the woman that was going to be stoned to death for being caught in adultery. He didn't say, "All right, go and continue doing what you're doing because I love you and I forgive you." It was go and sin no more. It was like
Mm.
he was addressing the heart of the sinner, but
Yep.
also addressing the gravity of the sin at the same time. And look, super traditional fundamentalist people can really focus on hammering the sin part. And it's always so interesting. It's the sin that they don't struggle with, right? So they
Yeah,
don't struggle
for
with
sure.
same sex attraction. So they love pounding other people about it, right? But
Yep.
like, yes, you can get super crazy on the traditional side and really only focus on the law. But if you don't have both, you have nothing. And I feel like part of it, Jim, is because the church has accepted its position as being downstream from culture in America.
Mm.
And we constantly look at whatever the cultural battle is and like, oh, we're not going to get involved in the culture wars. We're just going to let people push us back. And I forgot the quote. It was a quote from Eric Metaxas's latest book, Religionless Christianity, where it's like these people basically think, you know what, I'm going to leave some powder for tomorrow's battle, right? I want to keep some powder dry for tomorrow's battle. And it's like, what if today's battle is the last one? What if this is
Mhm.
the last battle?
Yeah.
And then it's like tomorrow comes and you realize, oh crap, the war has passed me by and I never picked up my musket. It's like, is that really the best idea? Like, I'm not sure I agree with that, Jim.
I think you got to leave it all on the table every day, man. You just got to
I,
leave it out there. I mean, you just got to leave it out. And I think there's a lot of fear, in the pulpit. I talk about this in my book. I talk about peacemakers, peace breakers, and peace fakers. And there's a lot of a lot of pastors today are peace fakers. They're acting like everything's okay and they're bringing peace, but really what they're bringing is cowardice. They're cowards, and so we need it. Or either that, or they don't believe in Jesus, right? Because Satan, if he's going to put his minions anywhere, he's going to put them in pulpits. You know, so either these are cowards or they're not Christians. And this is what we've got to, as believers, we've got to trust the Holy Spirit in us, showing us that our spirit matches their spirit, right? So,
yeah. Well, Jim, I want to get into your new book here in a second, but before we get there, it's interesting because even the way I teed up the first question, I can't remember if I said it or you said it, but we were talking about men's ministry, quote unquote men's ministry. And
yeah.
you're exactly right. Most churches, regardless of size, they don't have a men's ministry pastor, or if they do, it's like their seventh job title. Like they're the small groups pastor and they're the parking lot pastor
Mm-hmm.
and they're the coffee pastor and then, men's ministry. But typically what men's ministry is once a year, we're going to do a men's event where we're going to pay, Jim Ramos or Kyle Thompson to come out there and get these guys whipped up and fired up, and we're going to feed them meat. And then,
Mm-hmm.
then we're just going to go back to status quo. And then we'll probably do it again next year. But we don't really have it in the budget for next year. So maybe if we can get a sponsor, we'll do it. Maybe not. It's not a big deal because, who cares? I've stopped, Jim, personally talking about men's ministries because I kept having church leaders reach out to me like, how do we get a vibrant men's ministry? Men's ministry. How
Yeah.
do we do a men's ministry? And I was like, what if we didn't try to do a men's ministry? What if we just tried to make our churches man friendly? Wouldn't
Mm.
that be better? And so, like, because most churches might as well have a blinking neon sign saying, men, this is not for you. We don't have you in mind. The songs that are sung in a key that men can't hit. The lyrical content is homoerotic. The pastors are not the types of men that we would follow into battle. And so we're not going to follow the dictates that they should have for our lives. And so most men, and this, if we don't feel desired and wanted and needed, we will go somewhere where we feel desired, wanted, and needed. And so if we show up at church and all the volunteer opportunities are meant for the women, if all of the ministry opportunities are meant for the women and for the children, then guess what? We'll go to the shooting range. Guess what? We'll go play some pickup basketball. Guess what? We'll get ready for our third fantasy football draft. We're not going to sit there and be subjected to the abuse that you give us on Father's Day when you haven't spent the other 364 days of the year trying to help us be the heads of our households and to catechize our families. So what do you think about this shifting to saying, hey, let's make our churches more man friendly as opposed to worrying about quote unquote men's ministry?
I think you need a healthy dose of both, but it's interesting. I got a phone call yesterday from a 40-year-old Army veteran who he got hit by an IED. This guy lives in the Dallas-Fort Worth area in Texas, missing his middle finger. Had a great conversation with him, and he said, "Hey Jim," and he connected with me through a fitness app that I teach through, a secular fitness app, and he said, "I want to find a church. But what am I looking for? All these churches are filled with guys I would never follow." He's quoting you. He's quoting you verbatim. And I said, well, okay, there are churches around, but you've got to look for certain things. And I shared the man friendly thing. I said, you got to look for churches that are dark. When you walk in, it has a darker feel, because men like to feel, we're like hunting dogs. We like a closed, tight, and closed space where we can be shoulder to shoulder, not eye to eye. It's got to make sure the temperature is low in the room, not 80 degrees. Make sure there's nothing pink or floral in the foyer. And this guy up front, he needs to dress like a man, dress like you would dress, speak your language, preach the Bible. And if the music is at all not biblical, and I'm talking about like Matt Maher's song, I feel us moving to the rhythm of your grace. I'm intoxicated in our secret space. I'm like, whoa, what? Or the whole heaven meets earth like a sloppy wet kiss. Find a place that is masculine friendly, that caters to men, and you'll know it instantly because you'll want to come back. And people are talking about that church, because that's not the normal church. Most churches cater to the women, so you will know that church. So I think that's a critical thing for pastors listening. You've got to make your church man friendly, and it really starts with the pastor. He's got to be the guy who says, hey, listen, and this is, I played college football and I'm a hunter. And one of the things I noticed about churches today and pastors, and I've been doing ministry full time for almost 35 years now, nonstop, vocationally. You get a guy who nobody liked or interacted with in high school. He's kind of nerdy, maybe on the nerdy spectrum. And I was a straight A student, so I guess I was on the nerdy spectrum too. But he was one of those guys, and he goes away to school, and he doesn't drink, doesn't chew, doesn't hang out with people who do, which is fine. I applaud that. But he goes away to school, he gets his degree and comes back, and now he's a pastor. But he's never had anybody follow him ever in his life. So he starts doing a church, and the men of the church intimidate him. So what does he focus on? He focuses on the women. Yep. And this is what we're seeing a lot of in our society. And we need to change that ship. It's killing our culture.
Hey guys, real quick. Here recently, one of my family members was telling me about how they partnered with another family and they bought some beef from this local cattle producer. And when they got the beef, it was unbelievably terrible. And I can tell you this from experience, because they made me some beef ribs from that animal and they were terrible. And they even gave me some steaks and some ground, and it was basically inedible. I couldn't believe how bad it was. And they ended up finding out that the person killed an old bull or something like that, and just the meat was old and tough and awful. And that's just what happens when you don't have a quality cattle operation that you can trust to give you a quality beef product on the back end. And that's, guys, why I want to introduce you to the official beef delivery partner of Undaunted.Life, my friends at Primal Beef. So Primal Beef is a cattle operation owned and operated by Sean Glass. He's a retired Navy SEAL that has partnered with Jocko Willing to launch Primal Beef. So what makes Primal Beef different from some of these other cattle operations where you're going to end up getting bad beef? This operation is all American Black Angus cattle. The beef comes from one farm, and that's in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley. The beef is all natural, no hormones ever, no mRNA ever, no vaccines ever. And after slaughter, this is a big deal. The beef is dry aged, and then it's hand cut by artisan butchers and then flash frozen to ensure that it maintains tenderness, marbling, and flavor. And here's another great thing about it. For every box sold, Primal Beef donates meat directly to a member of America's Special Operations Forces through the C4 Foundation. So you can take pride knowing that your purchase will help to put literal food on the table for America's finest warriors. If you're not salivating yet, it's probably because you're a communist. Don't be a communist. Try Primal Beef out today by going to www.primalbeef.com. That's primalbeef.com. Use the promo code Kyle, that's my first name, to get 10% off of your order. The great thing about that promo code is you can stack that on other deals as well and get all this money off. Again, that's primalbeef.com, promo code Kyle, that's Kyle, to get 10% off your order. It's certainly killing our culture. It's killing our seminaries. And I take it all the way back to the Industrial Revolution and the World Wars. The only men that were left in these towns or small villages were the elderly, the young, or the sickly, the people that weren't, capable to fight. And so if you're a pastor and the majority of the people like in your congregation are women and children, obviously the sermon content will go way more grace and way less truth. The music will appeal more to the effeminate heart and not the masculine identity. And so I think that's all true. But but we can wax poetic about that all day. We'll probably still wax poetic a little bit, but we do need to do a little bit of house cleaning here because you have a new book out, which, guys, if you're listening to this on time, you have a new book out right now. It is in the show notes. It's called Dialed In, Reaching Your Full Capacity as a Man of God. You had to show it because I don't have one here. I don't know what's
I know,
up
and
with
I don't know
team.
why, because I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
They should have sent it to you. That's weird.
Hey, now you have to send me 2. That's how this works, okay? I would have just asked for 1, but now I have to have 2, okay?
I'll send you 2, and I'll send you like a hat or something,
okay,
too.
all right. That'll work out just fine for me. So we'll get dialed in. So, okay, what is this book about? Why now?
Well, I think you're going to like this based on our previous conversation. So what I did is I took the pastoral epistles of 1 Timothy chapter 3, Titus chapter 1, and in those epistles, Paul is speaking to Titus, who's pastoring on Crete, and Timothy, who's pastoring in Ephesus. They're both young pastors, growing large movements, and he gives them the qualifications of deacons or elders. In other words, he's given them the biblical qualifications of spiritual leadership. In other words, he's giving them God's qualifications for men who are dialed in to him, which should be the goal of every man. And I think even non-Christian men, there of the 20 qualities listed here, every one of these, except for maybe 2, would relate to the non-Christian man as well. And so he gives this list. Now, the problem, I acknowledge 2 authors who wrote books that were wonderful books in 1974 and 1996 that got my wheels spinning. But as I read through these books, they were pulling out their translation, the translation they used, they're pulling out the English and talking about that. The problem is these Greek words that Paul used, words and phrases, are often translated into the same English word, even though they're different Greek words. And so what I did is I said, let's take the original Greek and turn it into one definitive masculine word that guys can sink their teeth into. And so that's what we did. There are 20 qualifications that make a man and separate a man from a male, help a man dial in his life. And so that's what we did. We unleashed these 20 qualifications. And my opening story, I talk about sighting in a rifle and how you dial it in. And so that's really what this is doing. It's kind of a sequel off my first book, which is right over there, Strong Men, Dangerous Times. I don't like which finger.
Yeah.
And this really takes that book where I list the 5 essentials of manhood, and I dial it into these 20. And these are God's measurements, God's qualifications for men. So that's why I'm excited. We're removing any opinion. We're just going, okay, God, what do you think?
All right. So I appreciate you giving us that overview. We'll dig into some of those qualities here in just a second, but I have a suggestion for you and for your audience, because here's the thing that you and I both know: men don't read. Okay, so heaven and earth has to be moved. That's why, Christian publishing houses don't do a lot of men's books, because a lot of guys are just trying to rewrite Wild at Heart, which is basically the only Christian manhood book that's ever been wildly successful. But that book was released in the early 2000s, and it's unique for a reason. That's why it's sold millions of copies. But this is my suggestion. I would tell guys that if you get this book, go to that list of 20. So go to the table of contents. And if you like writing in your book, write in it, or if it's whatever. So you can't do this with audio, or I guess you could maybe. The 5 qualities that you think automatically apply to you, like, oh yeah, that's totally who I am. Check those. And then the 5 that are like, that's not me at all, I'd prefer to avoid that. Check those as well. And those are the chapters that you read first, because you could read this just from beginning to end, right? So, but they don't necessarily build off of one another or build from the previous chapter. But I think for a lot of guys, we love to look at our strengths and we love to kind of be like, yeah, I am that way. That is great. I already do that. And then the stuff that we kind of suck at, we're like, no, we're just going to pretend like he didn't write these chapters. So that would be my recommendation for guys. But you're the author of the book. You get to tell people what to do. So if they are going to read this book, how would you tell them to tackle it to where they might actually get to the end and actually do something about it?
Well, that's really interesting that you say that, because my audience are mostly guys 30 to 50 with kids in the home, and they'll read their Evinrude motor how to work their Evinrude motor, their new Dodge Ram, how to the manual for that. They'll read their new hunting rifle scope that you push the dot and the button and the red dot moves down to where you shoot. They'll do all that, but books are different. Yep. So for what we've done is I've personally put this book with my own voice reading it. It's on Audible. It'll be on Audible, released September 3rd. So I would say if you're not a reader, listen to the book. But then as far as those who read the book, this book was 90,000 words when I finished it. And I realized men aren't going to read it. So we cut 1/3 of the words out of this book. So what I tell guys is this. First of all, each chapter has 10 assessment questions at the end of it, along with small group materials, but 10 assessment questions where you can go through and assess yourself based on the questions, and you don't have to guess what your top 5 are. You take this assessment survey, and you can tell at the end of the book, when you compare all 20, where you're strong and where you're weak, and you can go to our website and you can crunch those numbers in and see how you measure up with the thousands of men who have taken the test. So here's where men should start. The most important chapter in the book is chapter 1, the blameless man. The second most important chapter in the book is the last chapter, chapter 20, the disciplined man. So those 2 chapters bookend the entire book. So I would start with those 2 chapters and then see what they think from there.
Okay, well, let's actually dig in, because what you basically described is something I talk about a lot, which is primacy and recency. And so people typically remember the first thing they hear or experience and the last thing they hear or experience. So if you're a professional speaker, guys, or podcaster or a writer or something like that, if you don't punch them in the face to begin with, you're already working from behind, and it's going to take you a while to get out of that hole. And if you don't end, like if you end with a thump, like a thud, like a little thud, instead of like a really, punchy thump, that's a problem as well. You don't want to, because we've all watched that movie that it started amazing and then the ending was kind of terrible and you're disappointed. And we've all had that movie where it just dragged on. You wanted to turn it off, but then the ending was great. Both are not optimal. You want to start good and end well, and hopefully in between it's not a crap sandwich as well. So let's start with the blameless man. The subtitle of that chapter is Live Above Reproach. And so we live in a blame culture. People want to be blamed for everything, and they want to obfuscate away from blame. Like, oh, that's not my fault, whether it's at work and relationships. It's always the other person's fault, right? So talk to me a little bit about the blameless man and why we should shoot to live above reproach.
Yeah, so let me just say this. So the blameless man is first because in both Titus chapter 1 and 1 Timothy 3, Paul lists it as the very first thing. And in Greco-Roman world, the way they ordered things was greatly deeply important. In other words, if you read the list of the disciples, it starts from the most prominent, Peter, and then the other 3, the other 2 that Jesus hung out with the most, James and John, goes down to Andrew and down the line, and the last one listed is Judas Iscariot. So everything, whenever you read the Bible, you've got to look at how things are ordered. That tells you the value that is put on them in that culture. So the fact that Paul wrote this with the blameless man living above reproach as first, it tells you that it is predominant over the other 19. In other words, it's an umbrella. And this word, I love this word. I tell a story about my brother in this book. I love this word. The Greek word is anapolepnos. And one of the literal translations is to leave nothing to lay hold of. And I tell the story of my brother who was 125 pounds in high school playing against a guy who ended up playing at Kansas City Chiefs as a running back. And this guy trucked my brother all day long, and they crushed my brother's team. And my brother still has a shoulder. He's always cussing, talking about his shoulder, because the night this guy trucked him, and he reached up, and with his one good arm, he reached up and grabbed the guy's untied shoelace and tackled him. And it took him so much energy to do it, it blew out his shoulder. But he tells that story today. And I talk about men. I say, guys, what untied shoelace do you have hanging out there in the wind? Like, in other words, where are you not blameless? In Job chapter 1, God says of Job, he was a man of integrity, blameless and upright. What has you hunched over in shame because you're carrying a secret? Because God has called men to walk in full display in this world. Jordan Peterson says we are the only creature that God has made that walks with our sex organs exposed. So guys, besides Sasquatch, of course, what is causing you to hunch over like Adam in the garden, covering his package because now he's hidden in shame? That thing, you need to deal with it.
Well, and I think in addition to that, this leads into a discussion about manly community. And do you have men in your life that will be a Nathan to you, that will say, you are that man, King David, that are willing to risk those relational chips, willing to get punched in the face in order to bring those things to your attention? So a good example of this, another shout out for Joby Martin, who's the pastor of Church of 1122. He has told all of his elders, if Satan's going to try to take me out, this is what he's going to try to do. And so here are the questions you should ask me. So let's say you've got a drinking problem, which he does not. I'm using this as a generic example because
100%.
I have friends that have chemical predispositions, and so they have, drinking problems. So that would be like that man saying, not only are we in community together, not only are you my brother, not only am I inviting you to give me accountability, let me be precise. I need you to ask me periodically, how is your drinking? Or have you had a drink? Or have you had an experience where you went beyond what you knew you should go to? And what were the consequences? So you're giving someone that. I've told people before, for me, I don't have a chemical bend. I have more of a voyeuristic bend. I'm more lustful. And so like,
100%.
it's hard for me to not look at a beautiful woman. It's hard for me to not fantasize about them. But like for me, I've gotten rid of masturbation completely from my life. And so I have no need to look at pornography, and I have no need to look at all the different curves that I'm seeing in person, because I'm not going to use that later, and I'm not putting it in my spank bank so that I can have it later. You know what I mean? Like just talking real for all these men. But you have to have guys in your life that are asking you specific questions like, hey, have you looked at, and it's not just, hey, you're on my accountability software, because everyone knows how to get around the accountability software. I'm not anti-accountability software. I have it, but it's kind of worthless because I know how to get around my software to where you're not going to get pinged. I know the sites to go to that aren't going to ping that, right? You can just go to certain social media sites and go to the search function, and it's just porn wall to wall, and it'll never trip even the most sensitive softwares like XXX Church or Covenant Eyes. It's not going to show up. So we know how to do that. So I need to not only give you access to, my accountability software, I also need to give you access to ask me questions to where I'm not going to lie to you. So as part of being the blameless man, would you agree that we absolutely have to have ride or die dudes around us that will help hold us to that standard?
Yeah, it's really funny because Joby Martin's coming on our podcast in about a month. And on that chapter 1, The Blameless Man, we have a Bible small group set of small questions. And the last question is, have you just lied to me?
Hey, that's a great question.
Because I'm meeting with a guy tonight who's been lying to me about his sexuality, and his wife caught him at a strip club. And so, so now we got to deal with the lying part of it, because that's the scary part, is the lying part. Because we can lie and deceive our way, and then we get caught and that's what this blameless man is about. Is like, is there an area in your life that will cause great shame and embarrassment to the body of Christ and to your family? I mean, we look at Ravi Zacharias, right? He didn't get found out till he died, but look at the shame it caused. Look what it did. And so we just got to be really careful as men. This is of the 20 things, you can struggle in one or two of them, but if this is one of the ones where you're failing, you're out. You're just out. This is the most important one. This is the one that we have to guard the most.
Absolutely. And the thing is that's different for every guy. And so, like I said earlier, we love to wax poetic about someone else's sinful desires, because 100%. I have openly wondered with my friends, because like, look, I can have one or two scotches and then not turn into 10, but I have friends that can't have one or two because it almost always turns into 10. And I don't understand that. But I've also talked to guys that don't have the lustful predisposition that I had, right? It's not that they've never masturbated or never looked at porn, but they're not like so desirous of that activity that it yanks them in that direction, right? No pun intended. But we need to go ahead and get to the very end as well, and then we'll come back towards the middle. But the disciplined man. The disciplined man. So that's the end. So those are the bookends you talked about. The subtitle is Make Decisions Against Yourself. Make decisions against yourself, which is interesting. So go.
So it's interesting, Kyle, because this chapter, when I wrote it, it was the wise man. I wrote the entire chapter because I'm looking at this word sophron, the Greek word sophron, and William Barclay and his commentaries behind me over here on the left. He was so frustrated with this word. Commentators say that it has no translation, but if you look at it, it literally means safe mind. So I wrote this chapter, hey, this man is a man of wisdom, and I realized I'm going through the book of Ecclesiastes verse by verse right now, and I'm journaling every single verse. And I realized Solomon was an idiot. I mean, he did some of the dumbest, most unwise things I've ever
really
seen.
Smart idiot. Yeah.
I mean, I'm like, you had 1,000 wives, bro. I can't even handle one. And so, but what I'm saying here is, you can be a wise man, and you can still be a train wreck.
Yeah,
I've just seen it. So I just felt like the wise man was not appropriate. A man who has the ability. Now, I played sports. I'm a chaplain for a college football team. You hear phrases like this all the time: keep your head in the game, lock it down. These are all phrases that we use to describe Sophron. It's the guy who has he has a safe mind. He can keep things locked into his mind and make decisions against what he wants to do, right? Pornography and masturbation are fun in the short term, but the man who has Sophron has the ability to forsake the immediate for the ultimate. Right? I hate working out. I did a 50-pound sandbag on my backpack. I did 4-mile ruck yesterday. I hated it. Every mile I stopped with my wife, we did like squats or lunges. I hated it. It sucked. But that decision that I made against myself is going to benefit me ultimately. And Amen. I look at a lot of guys who are 58 years old and they're like, wait, you can rep out 10 pull-ups and chin-ups? Yes. Whoa, but you weigh 250 pounds. So, I mean, what I'm saying is, in that area of health, I've been able to make decisions against myself. And so if you can be a blameless man, but if you don't have the ability to make decisions against yourself, in the end, you're going to come to ruin, because in the end, that is the loose shoestring. So yep, I had to book in that chapter with that chapter, because it's vital for a man to be a blameless man.
Yeah, I love that. Make decisions against yourself, because so people don't understand. I know you will understand, but people don't understand. They're like, Kyle, you say that you hate working out, but you do it all the time. Help me understand. I'm like, because it's what's required of me. Like, if I want to be healthy, if I want to be strong, if I want to be explosive, if I want to age well, if I don't just want a long lifespan, but I want a long health span,
yep.
Part of that is eating real food that, doesn't, come from the middle of the grocery store, maybe comes from the edges, food that I've killed myself, but also has to do with how I use my body. Now, there are different sides of that, because I'm 38 years old, but I also know that I'm not chasing anybody. I lift alone in my garage. And so I'm not trying to, impress my gym crush or, my workout partner or something like that. And so doing certain modalities at certain weights or at certain speeds are useless for longevity. And I'm focusing on longevity. But the other thing about this that I would add, and I talk about this all the time, is pre-decision. Not just decision, but pre-decision. So when I woke up this morning, Jim, there was no question as to what was going to happen. I was going to exercise, unless I woke up and my arm was on the floor. Then it's like, all right, well, I guess I can't bench today, right? But I've pre-decided. I'm not waiting for the moment to show up for me to decide if I'm going to do this thing. And I want to actually take that pre-decision discussion into what you talk about in chapter 8, which is the protector. So that's chapter 8, the protector. Never start a fight, finish it.
That's interesting. So I would say for predisposition, I would say negotiation. Don't negotiate. Mm-hmm. Negotiation. If you negotiate, you're going to lose every time. You decide and you make it happen.
Right. Just look at yourself as a terrorist, and we don't negotiate with terrorists. Okay. And so because you are definitely going to do the thing that's going to destroy you and everyone around you, as 100%. A terrorist would. But with the protector chapter, never start a fight, finish it. Here's one of my biggest issues. So I talk about jujitsu all the time on my show. I talk about learning how to fight. I talk about being a weapon, talk about concealed carry, make sure that you're dangerous with knives and firearms. But if you get in a fight at an airport or while you're on vacation, you should be able to use your paws to get them on somebody and to take care of an issue at least long enough for help to arrive. Now, a lot of guys have started training jujitsu, Muay Thai, Western boxing because of my show, because my adamance about it not only being good for you physically from exercise, it's good for you mentally, but it's actually a skill that can be transferred to real life. You can't transfer the skill of chipping a ball into the green from 150 yards into real life. That's only good in a golf context. But so many men, especially big guys, they're like, I'm big. So if something were to happen, I'm just going to big guy my way out of it. But I know better. I've seen 6'5", 250-pound men being held down by 5'6", 150-pound men, and the small guy is just literally toying with them. I try to explain it to people. I'm like, look, because I'm purple belt, hopefully going to be a brown belt soon. But whenever I roll with someone who's never rolled before, it's like I'm rolling with a child. And people don't understand that, but I'm like, that's essentially what's happening here. Like, you're basically a baby. But so many men are not doing what it actually takes to be a protector. They think if someone breaks in the middle of the night that they're just going to see red and react. It's like, no, you're going to see red and you're going to freaking die because you haven't done the training. You haven't pre-decided. You haven't even pre-decided that you would kill somebody to protect your wife and children. So how in the world would you expect to, in the moment, to negotiate with yourself and come out with a positive settlement? So flow on that a little bit.
So when you say see red, are you talking about Jeff Cooper's red? Is that what you mean by see red? Jeff Cooper's red readiness codes?
No, no, no. I'm talking about they're
Okay.
gonna like see rage. Like I'm gonna see red, and I'm just gonna and I'm gonna overtake this man trying to hurt me and my
Okay.
family.
Yeah,
So I'm
because in
talking
my
about it
book,
like literally. Yeah, they think they're gonna
okay, in my
see
book,
red, get
well,
rage. Yeah,
yeah, Jeff Cooper has four colors of readiness: white, yellow, orange, and red. And red is when you have the altercation. And
right.
the guy that you're talking about never sees red. He's running it. He's running away from it. But I hear
Yeah,
what you're saying. That's why I wanted the clarification. So I will just warn you right now. This is the most controversial chapter I wrote. I take what I think is a scholarly minority view. So I'm just warning you on this, okay? So what I do is I take the discourse where Jesus said, "Turn the other cheek," where 11 times Jesus used the pronoun "you" or "your," and I came up with three, when to use the shield, when to use the sword, when to get on the cross. So my scholarly minority view is this, and I think you'll probably agree with this, but I am definitely in the scholarly minority. I think so. If Jesus never had to tell the disciples, to defend the weak and the powerless. That's mentioned over 250 times in the Old Testament, right? So when Jesus talked about turning the other cheek, he used the word "you" and "your." Just because he did that, that implies he knew that these guys, he did not have to tell them to protect the unborn, protect the weak, protect the helpless. He knew that they would do that, right? These Jewish people are little angry fighters. I mean, if you look at them in the history of our world, they've always been fighting with somebody. They are just brutally violent nation. They always have been. They always will be. So he did not have to tell them to defend the powerless. That makes sense.
mm-hmm.
So I need to when that happens. He knew it was implied. That's why he used the word "you" and "your," that they would do it. So he didn't have to talk about it. So what happens if somebody attacks me? Right? If somebody attacks somebody else, I have to, by biblical mandate, step into that situation, and I need to protect the innocent, right? I'm going to step in and I'm going to protect the innocent. Now, here's where I feel like I'm in the scholarly minority. If somebody comes after me, if you come after me, Jesus said, "Turn the other cheek," right? Go an extra mile. If you come after me, the scholarly majority would say, "Let him slap you. Give him the other cheek." I think that Jesus was not saying that. I believe this. Here's what I believe. And this is what's put me in the scholarly minority. I think this is also why a lot of men don't like going to church. If you come after me, I have a biblical mandate. I'm a steward of my time, talents, and resources. God has given me a life to steward. And if you come after me to try to hurt my life and the stewardship God has given me, you're going to be in trouble, bro. Because I'm not going to let you do it. I'm gonna defend myself and steward my body. And then the third thing I talk about in this chapter is this: there is a time, however, and this is where this is where the alpha guys kind of get tweaked, because you can be an alpha guy when it comes to your physical strength, and you can be a complete pansy when it comes to Jesus. And we see this with a lot of our special ops guys. And so what I tell guys is this: if somebody is coming after you and they want to kill you because of Jesus, get on the cross. Badge of honor. I mean, I want to be persecuted for my faith. The problem in America is we don't really want to be persecuted, so we are gutless cowards. So in my book, I say, hey, when is the time to get on the cross? When somebody is persecuting you for Jesus. When is the time to bring the shield? When somebody is hurting the helpless or defenseless. When is the time to bring the sword? If you're going to come after me to hurt me, I've got to steward my body. So it puts me in the scholarly minority, and it makes this chapter probably the most controversial in the book, in my opinion.
Right. Well, it's interesting you talk about it being the minority. So I'll read the passage that we're discussing. Matthew 5:38-40. You have heard it said, eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. So here's an interesting thing that says that apparently I'm in the minority as well. Because if I slap you on the right cheek, I'm going to have to use my right hand in order to do that, right? But how we can know that Jesus was talking about verbal slights and not physical slights is because you would have I actually said that wrong. If I'm going to slap you on your right cheek and use my right hand, which everyone's right-handed, I would have to backhand you, right? And
Yes.
that is a corollary or an anecdote that would show if I hit you with the back of my hand, that is akin to a verbal slight. Okay. Because if I smack you with my right hand, open hand smack, I'm hitting you on your left side. This may seem like we're splitting hairs here, but this is very important. So that leads me to believe, and has led other scholars to believe, that Jesus is talking about verbal slights. That if somebody verbally slights you and they hit you across the face, they are hitting you with the back of their hand. So give them another opportunity with the other cheek. So because I went into this whole rabbit hole because I was debating this anti-gun Christian pacifist activist guy,
Yeah.
and I was trying to destroy his arguments, which was incredibly easy. But it was basically like, why would Jesus use these examples about, hey, go and buy a sword? Why would he use these examples of the strong man being bound? Why would he use these examples? Why would he violently clear the temple of not only animals but also people? Why would he do that if it wasn't prescriptive in certain situations? Now, the problem is, and you already know this, is that you will take guys that will look at, Jesus overturning the tables and violently clearing the temple and be like, well, I just need to walk around with my whip out at all times, ready to kill people. It's like, no, that's not it either. But there are moments when that is righteous and
Yes.
exactly what you should be doing. But that's kind of like where a chapter like this is. You're going to get people that disagree, but it's going to be because of their priors and what they already believe, their prejudices as it pertains to the subject matter, that they're not going to allow for you to push them one way or another. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, and what because I'm a just war guy. That there's four
Sure.
views of violence in the church history, and I'm a just war guy. And so here's what I'm trying to really poke the bear on this one. I'm really addressing the guys that are hiding behind cowardice, and they're using theology to do it.
Yes.
So if you're just a gutless coward and you're not going to defend that little kid who's getting beat up by somebody, that you're just a gutless coward. Here's the other thing too. In our world, Kyle, most of the bullies today are online.
Sure.
They're online bullies. And so, are you going to sit there and so we've got to be, so back then it was a physical thing, and today it's mostly not a physical thing, but nonetheless, if somebody's going to hurt the innocent or the helpless, I'm going to come in and bring the shield, and I'm going to bring it hard. Like I was downstairs yesterday. There's a school down below me, and it's got about 70 kids in it. And I walked in there, and they all looked at me because it just started yesterday. And the teacher goes, "Come in here, Mr. Jim." And I walked in, and the kids are like, I'm a big guy, man. They're like wanting to cry when they see me. And she said, "Now this is Mr. Jim. I know he looks scary." And she said this. She said, "But he's a protector."
Yeah.
And I thought, you know what? That's exactly right. Because listen, I'm not going to start the fight. But if somebody comes in and hurts a little kid, I'll guarantee you I'll finish it.
Well, and Jim, like there's a quote that I keep on the background of my phone. It's lion for them, lamb with them. And so that's basically a reminder for my family to make sure the lion's available, but to never show it to them, because this to be true, that if your wife and children, or if those kids in that classroom, if they didn't think the lion was available, they're going to be insecure. They're going to be terrified. But if all they ever see is lion, then they're going to be destroyed. They're going to be anxious, right? Like so you don't want to do that. But there's no virtue, like this is a Jordan Petersonism, but it's like there's no virtue in a man that's not dangerous. Because if you're incapable of violence, that doesn't make you virtuous, that makes you worthless. And so that's, we could get into the whole definition of meekness and different things like that. But I remember when this happened, there was a rape that occurred on a train in Philadelphia. And when the train went to the stop and, the police were there and the whole situation was basically already over, there were a bunch of people that went up to the police officers and volunteered their phones as evidence, because as opposed to interceding and stopping the rape, the forceful, violent penetration of this image bearer of God, they pulled out their phones and they called the police and they took video, right? And so the funny thing about that scenario, it's not funny, it's funny in a macabre way, is that you had pacifistic pastors, pacifistic individuals that said, why didn't somebody try to help that person? To which I would ask them, what were they supposed to do, pacifistic pastor? Were they supposed to start a Bible study? Were they supposed to surround them into a prayer circle? No, in that moment, it's too late for that. We're not going to pray for that person, or we're going to do it as we put our hands on them to remove them from that violent situation. Because in order to protect the innocent, darkness never stops itself, Jim. Like mass shooters, right? The only times they kill themselves is once they're cornered. Once they're like, all right, it's either going to be dying by my bullet or the police's bullet. I choose mine. It's a narcissistic final move in their satanic, worthless life, right? But why do why do we have to have good guys with guns? It's because bad guys with guns don't stop. They don't just get bored and stop killing people. And so in that situation, that rapist is not going to stop until they have reached sexual climax. And so that is my responsibility in that moment to intercede. But to these pacifistic pastors, it's like, sorry, you don't get to play both sides. You don't get to castigate people as cowards when you yourself holds to the cowardly ideology.
Well, it's really interesting. In the book, I say this: the world that you interact with should be safer, should feel safer because you are in it. And I heard another phrase. I thought this was really good. Can't remember where I heard it, but somebody once said the saddest day of a man's life is when he realizes he's no longer dangerous. Now you're 38. I'm 20 years older than you. So it's not as easy as it used to be for me.
Sure.
So, but I see guys that are my age. I went to my 40th class reunion. I see guys walk in the room and they're just like, I'm like, man, you're not dangerous. You're not dangerous anymore. And so that's a sad day. And so I want to feel like when I walk into the room, everyone around me is safer. I mean, when I position myself in a restaurant, I position myself to see the whole restaurant. Everywhere, when I was working with my wife yesterday, I'm walking on the street side. Everything I do as a protector so that the world in which I operate. Well, and you hear this buzzword out there all the time. It bothers me on some level, but I don't feel safe. Well, the world isn't safe. But if I'm in the world that you're in, you should feel safer because I'm there. And if you don't feel safer, trust me that you are safer. Even if you don't know who I am, you're safer because I'm in that restaurant.
Absolutely. And it's not just about mindset. It's about, pre-deciding and doing the training because,
Yes.
people have asked like, hey, Kyle, you're 38. Like, why do you work out so hard? Why do you train so hard? Why do you do all these things? And so I kind of picked this up from somebody else. I wish I could give them credit, but it's like, I have a 4-year-old son and a 2-year-old son. Okay. And one day it's coming. One of my sons is going to tell another kid, my dad can beat up your dad. And I want to make sure they're not lying. Okay. And so like, that's how I'm going to train. You heard this thing, Toby Keith, may he rest in peace, great Okie. Don't let the old man in. That song he recorded just before he died.
Okay.
That is also my job. I don't want to let the old man in because we get to choose that for the most part. Now, if you get a debilitating disease or get into an accident, that's something that you did not get to choose. I'm so sorry that happened to you. But for the majority of the rest of us, we get to choose whether or not we stay dangerous and stay ready, as we move forward in the future. Go ahead. You look like you want to.
I was just laughing. I was going to say, well, my theme song of Toby's is I'm not as good as I once was, but I'm as good once as I ever was.
Yeah. Hey, that's the way to do it. That's why, hey, country music is 3 chords and the truth for a reason. But hey, Jim, we're running out of time here. So I'll make this the last question of the day. So obviously we've got the book. It's there in the show notes. So what's next for you? So you've been in ministry for multiple decades. Obviously it doesn't look like you're getting tired of it and it doesn't seem like you're slowing down. What's next?
Honestly, we've been praying a prayer. I started hunting ducks in 1995. I learned how to call ducks by Phil Robertson. Didn't even know Willie existed, but I just had Willie on the podcast about a month ago. And I've been praying this Duck Dynasty prayer forever that God, if you can take a guy who was biting the brains off a duck on ducks to kill them and making these duck calling videos, and if you can make him a household name for Jesus, surely you can do that with our ministry. So our thing is we're just going to keep charging until we see this culture change and transform by you and me and all the other guys in our space who are done with the pendulum swing and we're swinging it back the other way. I wrote an obituary about 20 years ago. I'm actually doing a mission development seminar this Friday for anybody who pre-orders this book, and we're going to write our obituaries. And it's really interesting. When I wrote that obituary, I launched this ministry before I ever launched the ministry, and I wrote 20 books. This is my 16th book. So I'm just going to keep going, man. I'm going to keep charging hell with a squirt gun. I don't ever have a plan to retire. Don't want to retire. I feel that I know I'm called by God and I'm going to do God's work. And if I have a pulse, he's got a plan. And so my plan is just keep pushing forward and then listening to the Holy Spirit. And if God says, I want you to do a radio show, we'll do a radio show. If he wants me to do a movie show, I'll do a movie. Whatever God wants, I'm going to do, but we're going to keep doing this until we reach and change this culture.
All right, Jim, that's all for me. Is there anything else you want to get off your chest?
Nope. Just maybe about 290 pounds on the bench press in a workout today.
All right. Don't blow that shoulder out. All right, Jim. Thanks for coming on.
All right, man.
There you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed my time with Jim. But before we let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted.Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. 2 links for you today. I've got a link to the Men in the Arena website so you can check out everything that Jim's doing there, and also an Amazon link to where you can buy your copy of Dialed In. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And as always, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.